Well, thank you all for being here and taking your time to listen to Staci and I talk today. I know your time is valuable and your energy is valuable, so I really appreciate you taking it to spend some time with us. Our presentation today is called Proving Disabling Post-Exertional Malaise and Fatigue, Understanding Disability Benefits and the Two-Day CPET. My name is Andrew Kantor. I'm a senior partner at the law firm of Kantor and Kantor. We specialize in suing insurance companies when they don't pay claims they're supposed to pay. A large majority of those claims are long-term disability claims, and a significant portion of those long-term disability claims are claims involving chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS, long COVID, and other fatigue-related illnesses. With me today is someone who has made a profound difference for the ME/CFS and long COVID community. Staci Stevens is the founder of Workwell Foundation, and she and her team pioneered the use of two-day cardiopulmonary exercise testing to objectively document post-exertional malaise, giving patients something many never had before, which is scientific proof of what their bodies are experiencing. That research is now being used to evaluate people with long COVID as well, helping to document disability and guide rehabilitation. Staci has collaborated with Stanford, Cornell, the University of British Columbia, and the NIH, and was awarded the IACFS ME Innovators Award in 2022 for her groundbreaking contributions to ME/CFS science. Welcome, Staci. I'm very, very glad to have you here. On a personal note, I've been doing these cases for over a decade now, and from basically day one as a baby lawyer, I started working with Staci to help me with my ME/CFS clients. There was no long COVID clients back then, but with my ME/CFS clients, and she's probably taught me more than just about anybody else on the planet about these cases, about these clients, about all of you, and about how to handle these cases the right way. So I'm really excited to be doing this with Staci. I know we have a lot to offer you today. So what we're going to do is start with a overview of disability benefits, a little bit of explanation from me about how the system works, and then understanding the basics of why two-day cardiopulmonary exercise test is important. Staci will then go into detail about the test and the science and how it works and everything you need to know about the two-day CPET. And then at the end, I'm going to address some concerns that are out there about the two-day CPET, and how I handle them, and how I think you may want to handle them if you're in this situation. So first, disability benefits. There are a few kinds of disability benefits. Overall, the definition is being unable to work despite reasonable accommodations. Now, we could have a whole other presentation about what reasonable accommodations means, but for this purpose, you know better than anyone when you can and can't work. The main sources of disability benefits, the two big ones are Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, which is provided by the federal government, which I'm sure most people have heard of. The other one is private short-term and long-term disability insurance. Just like health insurance, most people usually get it through their employers. It's an employee benefit. The other sources of disability benefits include state disability. If you're in California, Washington, and a smattering of other states, most states do not have this. And there's also the possibility of workers' compensation benefits if you can somehow tie your illness to work exposure or even your illness getting worse because of work. This is a lot more common with COVID exposure claims necessarily rather than long COVID, except if you're a medical professional who can trace your COVID exposure to the long COVID and you got exposed while at work, which happened to countless first responders, unfortunately. The big things to know about the difference between Social Security and long-term disability. So Social Security disability will pay you if you are unable to do any job, basically. It is a very hard standard to meet. Short-term and long-term disability will usually, for the first 2 years, pay you if you're unable to do your own job. So to put this kind of in perspective, if you're a surgeon who breaks their finger, you will not qualify for Social Security disability because there are other jobs you can do, and you can earn the minimum threshold, which is roughly $1,800 a month. You will definitely get short-term and long-term disability, at least for those first 2 years, because no surgeon with a broken finger can do surgery. There are a few other important nuances of long-term disability and SSDI, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the big picture is that there are a lot of challenges when it comes to filing disability claims when you have a fatigue-related illness. When it comes to long-term disability, one of the biggest obstacles is the fact that most long-term disability claims are governed by a federal law called ERISA. Um, and ERISA is evil, and it leads directly to an extraordinarily high rate of denials. I won't go too much into it, but so you understand how the law works. Normally, if an insurance company denies your claim and it is not governed by ERISA, let's say they owe you $1 and you sue them because they denied your claim in bad faith, you could get your dollar and maybe up to $10. Thus, insurance companies try not to blatantly deny your claim because they could be on the hook for 10 times what they initially owed you. It's bad business to deny claims consistently and wrongfully if the claim is governed by most state laws. If the claim that is governed by ERISA and they wrongfully deny a claim, the only thing you can get from them in court are the benefits you're owed. It's akin to having a system where if you were to rob a bank, the only punishment is, if caught, having to pay the bank back. Imagine how many people would go robbing banks and giving it a shot if nothing bad would actually happen to them because all they have to do is pay it back. ERISA is one of the reasons health insurance is so awful in this country because about 50% of people get their health insurance under ERISA governed policy. And it's absolutely why disability is so tough in this country under long-term disability, because 85% of people get their long-term disability from their employer. One of the biggest problems with long-term disability specifically are the limitations in the policies. Now, the first obstacle is proving that you are disabled at all from anything. The next obstacle often are limitations within a disability policy. There's three types of limitations that you have to be aware of. One is a mental health limitation. Insurance companies love to classify anything they can as a mental health issue because they can just pay you for 2 years instead of until the end of the policy. Regardless whether you have a fatigue-related illness, whether you have MS, whether you have back pain, they will always try to pin it on depression if you're experiencing it. And it may not be surprising to hear that I think most people who are disabled from a physical issue also become depressed as a result. So it's something that insurance companies love to do. Another limitation that exists in these policies are something called self-reported symptom limitations, which basically say if you're disabled from pain, fatigue, or anything else which can't be proven, they will only pay you 2 years. As you can imagine, before the 2-day CPET, this was a massive problem because people who claim they had chronic fatigue had no way to prove it. They'd be limited to 2 years. The worst limitations in this context are fatigue limitations. They are specific limitations designed to only pay 2 years if you are disabled from a fatigue-related illness. Now, these are awful, and it's really hard to get around these. However, it's not hopeless. If you have a long-term disability policy, first, only about 10 to 20% of policies have fatigue limitations right now, so they're somewhat rare. The other thing is that I find the language to be extraordinarily broad and I think open to attack. So it really depends on what the language says. One example is that there's a recent policy I saw which said any fatigue-related illness or chronic fatigue syndrome, but the person's impaired from long COVID. I don't remember which one. One of the federal government agencies just released a basically fact sheet on long COVID, explicitly stating that it is a distinct disease different from chronic fatigue syndrome. They've been denying those claims as limited. I'm very eager to sue them about that when I get the chance to. But it's really important to check your policy for these limitations. None of these limitations exist in Social Security disability. In Social Security disability, by far, the hardest thing to do is just proving the disability. Because basically the Social Security Administration can say to you, yeah, we believe that you're impaired. We believe you can't do your job, but you could do something like surveillance system monitor or button sorter on a factory, sorting buttons in a seated job, and then you don't qualify for benefits. It is just an extraordinarily hard threshold. And 2 years ago, I was telling people the Social Security Administration is a really tough administration and they're underfunded and it takes a long time to get benefits paid. That has only gotten worse in the last 2 years. I just read an article on Fortune magazine talking about how the SSA has been stripped of a lot of its resources. Claims are taking a lot longer. And I have to imagine that's going to eventually result in more claims being denied. Wish I had better news in that regard, but unfortunately I don't. And the hardest thing for most people with a fatigue-related illness when they're handling a disability claim is that it's really hard to manage a disability claim when you're disabled from anything, let alone disabling fatigue. Dealing with insurance companies is exhausting. They are not friendly. They are not supportive. They do not walk you through anything. And even when they're nice, you can't believe what they're saying because half the time they're being nice for their own edification and to eventually support a claim denial. Um, so all of these things combined makes it really hard to get a disability claim paid, especially if you have a fatigue-related illness. Um, so how do you get a claim paid and how do they assess these claims? So there's three big aspects of any disability claim. First is going to be your medical records. They're going to look at the context of the records, the frequency of visits, and to actually see what your doctor's been observing and what you've been reporting. I'm sure what'll pop into your head is, but wait, my medical records aren't going to explain how much I can work. My medical records are there to document my treatment. You've identified the first problem with the entire system is that the insurance companies will depend on medical records, which are designed for treatment, not designed for disability documentation. But that's why there's allegedly the physician statement. So after the medical records, they will ask your doctors to fill out statements explaining your disability. The first obstacle there is the statements will be designed for people with sitting, standing, and mechanical issues. So they'll ask, how long can you sit? How long can you stand? How much can you lift and carry? Where none of that's really relevant to why you can't work. So ideally, what you want your doctor to do is explain in a narrative form why you're disabled, why you're unable to work, how often you're unable to work, and explaining the nuances of all that. What will often happen is the insurance company will get all of this, the medical records and the physician statements, and then respond that we understand what your doctor says, but there is no objective evidence supporting disability. And that is often one of the biggest problems with these claims because your response is, what else do you need? I've been seeing my doctor. I've been doing everything they say. I can't work. Like, how am I supposed to give you objective evidence, especially when I don't even know what exactly it means? So then you potentially ask them, what is objective evidence? Their response would be, they basically wouldn't define it. There is no real definition from any specific insurance company about what objective evidence is. Insurance companies would all believe that an X-ray is objective evidence of a broken leg. They don't believe that a symptom log that you write down is objective evidence, even if it is your objective perspective of what you're going through. So the kind of short answer is that unless you have a test which is accepted by the medical community to establish a level of impairment, which is not something that exists in almost any condition, let alone a fatigue-related condition, they will say you're lacking objective evidence. So objective evidence is an extraordinarily important thing to have for any disability claim. So when you talk about objective evidence generally, just taking a step back and taking a step away from fatigue claims specifically, there are three major tests that anybody who is impaired can potentially look into to get to support their claim. The first is a functional capacity evaluation. This is designed for people with mechanical, spinal, wrist, arm issues, nerve issues who are impaired by their inability to sit, stand, lift, or do anything like that. So first, it is usually unhelpful to people with fatigue-related illnesses because it won't capture what it needs to capture. The other problem is that from my understanding, it can be harmful and very negatively impactful on people's bodies, having to go through a physical exam meant to press your physical limits for up to 2 hours at a time. So I personally very rarely recommend functional capacity evaluations for someone with a fatigue-related illness unless they also have another condition which directly impacts their ability to do mechanical things. And in that situation, we do a modified FC to make sure the person is safe when they do it. The next big piece of evidence you can use is a neuropsychological evaluation. A neuropsychological evaluation is designed to measure cognitive impairment. This is a much better option for people with fatigue-related illnesses because a large percentage of people with fatigue-related illnesses also have cognitive impairment as a result. The downside, there's two major downsides. One is that it's expensive. It's almost impossible to get a referral from your doctor for one because they'll deem it not medically necessary because they don't need proof of your cognitive impairment. Just the disability insurance company does. So you usually have to pay out of pocket. If you do get a referral or get someone through your medical office or find someone locally, one of the problems can be is the risk in that the evaluators, if they're not familiar with disability claims or fatigue-related illness, they may not provide you the results you need and basically evaluate you in a way which is way too supportive and optimistic. They may also, and this is a much bigger concern, mistake your fatigue for a lack of effort on the neuropsychological evaluation. in these tests, there are embedded validity measures where they'll ask you a bunch of hard questions and some really easy questions. And they know if you answer the easy questions wrong, you're exaggerating because everyone should be able to answer the easy questions. So when people answer the easy questions incorrectly, it's deemed to be exaggeration, and so the test is deemed invalid. So that can happen. That happens a lot with people with ME/CFS and long COVID who don't go to a neuropsychologist who have experience with disability claims and with fatigue-related illnesses. So between the cost and the risk, it's not accessible to a lot of people. The last option, which we're going to talk about a lot, is a 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test. It is highly effective, a lot less expensive than a neuropsych evaluation, and it has been really effective in helping us prove disability claims. There are concerns that I have occasionally heard from my own clients, occasionally see on the internet that I all thought were worth discussing and addressing. So I will address some of those concerns later on. A few things to just identify. These are a list of some of the long-term disability victories that have used the 2-day CPET. It's important to know that these cases have been used for multiple things, not just to prove the disability, but to get around the mental health provision and to get around the self-reported symptom limitation. So the 2-day CPET can be used for all of those. A little bit of shameless self-bragging. Tam versus First Unum was my father. Cochran versus Reliance Standard was my original partner, or original supervising partner, Corinne Chandler, and Fleming versus Unum was me. And I'm very proud of that case, especially because we won it on Thanksgiving Day, which was just a lot of fun. The next one is Social Security disability victories for the 2-day CPET. And just so you're all aware, we're going to make the slideshow available to everyone, so you don't have to screenshot this or memorize a list of cases. You'll get all of this afterwards. So just so you're aware, these cases are out there, they are working, and we'll be able to use them effectively when using the 2-day CPET. So next, I'm going to pass it off to Staci to actually talk about the 2-day CPET and how to measure functional impairment using it.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you all for being here. Andrew, to you and your team at Kantor and Kantor for having me. I'm just honored and humbled, and I love talking about CPET. So, you're letting me do my favorite thing, so I appreciate that. What is 2-day CPET? Well, let's talk about that. I'm going to go back in time 25 years, and Andrew, if you could forward the slide for me. This is what I thought. I wish that there was a test that could measure. And for all of you out there, what would that be? What would that look like? So 30 years ago, there was this thing called chronic fatigue syndrome. It wasn't ME yet, it wasn't ME/CFS yet, and people just couldn't get their disability benefits. And I was an exercise physiologist, and I thought, we need to be able to measure fatigue and severity and this really elusive symptom of post-exertional malaise, which is the hallmark feature of this illness. Insurance companies were just blatantly denying patients. So I still wish that there was a biological diagnostic test for ME/CFS and long COVID, but there isn't. But there is this thing called a cardiopulmonary exercise test that can give you tremendous information. And let's start with what is post-exertional malaise. Andrew, if you advance my slide, please. This is one definition, and it's defined as a worsening of symptoms after physical, mental, or emotional exertion that would not have caused a problem before the illness. And so it can be physical, it can be cognitive, it can be just maintaining the upright posture. You could have PIM just as a result of listening to this webinar and sitting up. Well, how in the world do you measure something like that? It's really perplexing. It's really hard to quantify for your lawyer, for your doctor. Next slide. The conditions that are associated with post-exertional malaise, some definitions call it post-exertional symptom exacerbation, or I like this one, post-exertional neuroimmune dysfunction. That really sort of captures it. And so we found that ME/CFS patients, it's still the hallmark feature of the illness. A very high percentage of long COVID patients experience this, And then we have all these comorbid conditions that also experience post-exertional malaise. We see it in fibromyalgia, often in Lyme disease, people with dysautonomia or POTS, EDS. I just had a client with post-concussion syndrome. And how interesting is that? That a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, could potentially cause post-exertional malaise, probably having to do with neuroinflammation. So all of these conditions are associated with post-exertional malaise. Well, that gets us to what is a cardiopulmonary exercise test? And it's simply a stress test that analyzes the responses and cooperation of the heart, the circulation, the respiration, and metabolism at both rest and during increasing stress. So it gives you a beautiful picture of multiple systems at play. Here's what the American Heart Association has to say about it. It says it's the gold standard aerobic exercise tolerance assessment. It's been around for more than 50 years. Every exercise physiology student has a lab on cardiopulmonary exercise testing. It's been used in heart disease and lung disease to evaluate impairment. There are guidelines for the evaluation of permanent impairment, and CPET has been used to both diagnose and functionally evaluate over 50 conditions, which is pretty amazing. What does it measure? So this is important. This is a short test, and I want to start with how long is the test last? It's 8 to 12 minutes on a bike, and you see the bike there. It starts with unloaded cycling, which means you have to keep up with it. It's actually kind of hard to keep up with the pedals for the first 2 minutes. And we do a very gradual ramping protocol so that the test gets you to peak in about 8 minutes. So for some, it's a little shorter, for some, it's a little longer, but we're really looking at it being hard for about 2 minutes of hard pedaling. It measures oxygen analysis. So we have an oxygen analyzer, a carbon dioxide analyzer that measures the carbon dioxide produced, and a flow meter that measures how much air is moving in and out of that mask. There's a little sample line coming out of the tube that measures every breath a person is taking. And so we can get the volume of oxygen consumed. So we know how much oxygen is being used to produce energy, how much carbon dioxide is being produced. When that bike gets harder to pedal, you produce lactic acid. In order to buffer that lactic acid, you produce and breathe out more carbon dioxide, and you breathe faster. The last thing that it measures is what every standard stress test measures, and that is we hook you up to an EKG, we've got a blood pressure cuff on your arm, and we measure heart rate, the heart rhythm to make sure everything is safe, and the blood pressure throughout the exercise test. Next slide. And what that gives us is these 5 areas to look at: the metabolic, the cardiovascular, which is the heart, pulmonary, which is the response of the lungs, work output, and then recovery. All of these things, we can say, hey, this is normal or this is an abnormal response. To the right there is the clinician's guide to cardiopulmonary exercise testing, and this little flow chart shows whether or not responses from a single cardiopulmonary exercise test are normal or abnormal and point to the type of impairment. And impairment, again, as Andrew mentioned, is really important. Is there circulatory impairment? Is there ventilatory impairment? Is there a problem with oxygen extraction or utilization that puts a person in an impairment category? Next slide. And what that does is it allows us to look at each of these systems and say, hey, can you use these systems to coordinate and deliver and use oxygen to produce energy? So, are you fatigued? Do you have post-exertional malaise? And if those systems that we just mentioned are abnormal, you might have one system that's abnormal, you might have multiple systems that are abnormal, but even subtle deficits across these systems can produce dramatic changes in your ability to function physically day in and day out. So, is one cardiopulmonary exercise test enough? We get asked this a lot, and this moves us to our next slide. Well, we started with one test. We were hoping that one test would do just that. And so this represents data from a study that we did at 12 sites all over the country back in the 90s, long, long ago, that used cardiopulmonary exercise testing as an outcome measure. And we stratified patients in terms of functional impairment based on their ability to use oxygen to produce energy into these categories from no impairment to severe functional impairment. And what we found was we found impairment, moderate to severe functional impairment for about half the group. The problem was the other half showed no impairment or only mild impairment. And so one test really missed the story. All of the physicians referring patients to the study said the patients were disabled with chronic fatigue syndrome. And yet, one single test didn't capture that problem of post-exertional malaise. Next slide. And so this is how we came up with, we really tried one test. We tried measuring a variety of things pre and post that single test to capture what was going on and then advance one more time. That didn't really tell the story. And so we thought, well, I bet if we waited 24 hours and brought the person back to do the test again, it would show a problem. And that's just what happened. And one more advance. Sorry, I'm making Andrew build my slides. And and boom, there we go. It showed post-exertional malaise. And so it was that unique two CPETs that was so important. And what was so unique about this is that heart disease patients, lung disease patients, cancer patients, HIV patients, MS patients can all reproduce their exercise test results, come back 24 hours later, and reproduce the same thing. And our ME/CFS patients could not. Fast forward 20 years, and the Institute of Medicine, now called the National Academy of Medicine, developed a report. And this is what they said about 2-day CPET and ME/CFS, that the protocol is now recognized as an objective measure of recovery after physical exertion as an adjunct to diagnosis in ME/CFS, and that the existence of post-exertional malaise can help physicians confirm a diagnosis. There's other professional endorsement of the 2-day CPET. I'm an exercise physiologist. Our professional association is the American College of Sports Medicine. They have a textbook called Guidelines for Exercise Testing and Prescription. In this latest edition this year, they have a chapter on ME/CFS, and the textbook says that it is valid and reliable method for assessing functional capacity, documenting impairment for disability claims, and guiding pacing strategies for conditions such as ME/CFS. And further, the American College of Cardiology, the California chapter on their website now has case examples of 2-day CPET, and they provide specific recommendations for the implementation and interpretation of the protocol. And they note that it should be used to document functional capacity and identify biomarkers consistent with PEM. And so the beauty of all of this is that the 2-day CPET, go ahead and advance the slide, measures the biological basis for PEM and what is going on that a single day doesn't capture. But when things start to go south and you don't recover and your symptoms begin to flare 24 hours later, that's what the second day captures. Next slide. We found that this was one of our original studies that we published in 2013. And this slide looks at workload at peak, and you'll notice that the control group does a little better. In fact, once they do an exercise test, they know what to expect and they can produce a little more work on test due. But the CFS group showed a decline. And if you look at the sustainable work capacity, which we call the ventilatory anaerobic threshold, the control group again on the second day knew what to expect. That threshold was just a little bit higher on day one, but on day two, for the ME/CFS group, the patients experienced a 50% reduction in sustainable work capacity in PIM. They lost half their work capacity, and that would have totally been missed with a single test. Next slide. Dr. Keller found the same results in an independent lab on the other side of the country, found an inability of patients to reproduce their peak, and found that if only one test was used, that functional capacity was overestimated by 55%. And so that's why you really need that second test. The first test provides the physical stressor. The second test unmasks post-exertional malaise. Practically, what that means in terms of energy production, and I'll give you a little ex-phys lesson here. Um, Aerobic energy is efficient. It gives you lots of energy units or ATP per glucose molecule. You get 30 to 36 energy units. When you shift to using your emergency energy system, your anaerobic system, you only get 2 for that same glucose molecule. So it's great to have an emergency energy system, but it produces lactic acid and it doesn't last for very long. But the problem is in people with PEM, the aerobic energy system is broken, and instead of getting 36 ATP, patients are shifting 50% earlier from an already low anaerobic threshold to a much earlier one where you're only getting 2 energy units and you're getting lactic acid and you're getting symptoms. And so it objectively identifies this broken energy production system. Interpreting a 2-day CPET, what does it tell us? Well, we compare the results, number one, to predicted values. So you are compared to somebody, your age, height, weight, and gender, and the computer spits out values that you should be able to achieve. And so we look at, can you achieve what is predicted? And the next thing we look at is we compare day one to day two to see if those results have changed, if there's a difference. And that would indicate if you are unable to reduce that there is post-exertional malaise. We also can identify a functional impairment category. And then the last thing is the question that I think is so important that it allows us to ask in terms of severity is the oxygen cost or the oxygen consumption higher than what you have available to do work and daily activities. And that is a concrete number. And we can determine based on what you do on the bike, whether or not it's safe for you to work an 8-hour day. And so this is the information that lawyers like Andrew need to win your disability case because you can't fake it. How do we prepare our clients for testing? I think this is, let's get to the nuts and bolts. We always recommend that you come in a rested state. If you come in post-exertional malaise, you minimize the chance of having that test-retest effect. So we like you to come rested. We want you to plan to rest and recover following testing, knowing that the idea is to cause post-exertional malaise so that we can measure it. But we want you to recover. We've found that IV saline and hydration can really improve that recovery time. And most patients, you should have an idea when you overdo activities, when you've tried to exercise, how long does it take you to recover? You should have an idea of what that recovery response should look like. And then during that recovery phase, plan to get some help. Make meals in advance. Get someone to take those kids to school and help you with your daily tasks until you're back to your baseline, to where you were before you took the test. I want to talk a little bit about slow versus fast PIM recovery. And I love the research we do because we always learn something new. We did a study that we published in 2020 on symptoms, and the patient experience is so important that we ask every patient about their post-exertional recovery response. We ask them how they felt after test one, after test two, what symptoms they experienced, and how long it took them to recover. And what we found was there was a fast recovery group, that 49% of our patients took 4.5 days or less to recover. And there was a slow recovery group, which this didn't surprise me. We were expecting this, that half the group, 51%, took 7 days or longer to recover. And so, again, you should know if you're in that slow group that recovers or that fast post exertional malaise group. This study was confirmed, and I like to look at the research because I think patients call and they say, "Hey, I'm really worried about this crash." Um, Dr. Moore did a study that looked at recovery from people with ME/CFS to 2-day CPET. It was an NIH-funded study at 3 different locations. There were over 90 participants, and the average recovery time was 2 weeks. It wasn't 2 months. It wasn't 2 years. It was 2 weeks. 7 to 8% did have a long recovery time of 1 to 2 months. And we took the open-ended questionnaire that they did, we just reanalyzed it, presented it last week at the American College of Sports Medicine, and guess what? We found the same thing that we did in our earlier study, is that there's a fast recovery group. Again, less than a week, about half. And then there's that slow recovery group. So, for any of you watching, half of you are going to be in that slow recovery group, and half of you are going to be in that fast recovery group. And that leads us to, if you're contemplating doing the 2-day CPET, you should consider the risks, because the risks of any test or procedure, there are always risks, and they're real. And in this case, it will cause post-exertional malaise and a chance of delayed recovery. Those are the risks. But on the other side, the benefits are the potential to get disability benefits, to have income coming in, potentially keep medical benefits, and provide validation so that you understand your illness, understand what's working and what's not working, and how to live your life better, pace your activities, and know what's going on with your health. In summary, cardiopulmonary exercise testing provides objective, reproducible assessments of integrated cardiopulmonary, metabolic, and ventilatory function. It's considered the gold standard. The 2-day CPET uniquely captures the physiology of post-exertional malaise. If you just do that single-day CPET, it often overestimates functional capacity in PIM, and it reveals the reductions that we see, both at peak and at submaximal levels. Usually, our big ticket items in all of the research studies that have been done have been oxygen consumption and workload on day 2. It also demonstrates that failure to recover from this very standardized test that's been around in medicine for over 50 years. The 2-day CPET is finally for you who are here wanting disability. It's highly applicable to disability evaluation and functional characterization. It objectively documents PIM, it identifies what systems are impaired, and it provides improved disability evaluation by putting you in an impairment category. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Andrew to finish us off.
Thank you, Stacy. That was fantastic. I really appreciate all of that. So, anecdotally addressing some of the concerns about the 2-day CPET from the lens of a lawyer, for whatever that's worth, to those who like lawyers. So, with the 2-day CPET, is there a risk? From my perspective, my investigation was supported and informed by Reddit's subreddit CFS. When I was advertising or discussing the webinar to try and get some feedback, a lot of people said, "Hey, there's a lot of concern about the risk of the test, and that is something you should absolutely address." So here I am addressing it. And I think it's a really good thing we should be discussing because, as Stacy said, there's no such thing as a totally safe test. And I think we all agree that informed consent is a very important thing. So when I was investigating the two major the concerns can be broken into two general categories. One, it may cause a temporary crash. Well, as Stacy explained, there's really no way around that. It is going to cause a temporary crash, but the crash is designed to replicate the normal PEM that you always experience. It's not in any way designed to push your body further than it's been, harder than it's been pushed, or do anything different to it that isn't done to your body anyways by, when you go grocery shopping or do anything else you have to do. So you should expect some kind of temporary crash. But thankfully, the science shows us that it's probably not going to be more than a few weeks. The bigger concern that I've heard is that it may cause a permanent crash, that doing this test may cause a reduction in baseline. There's not, there's not really a lot of science out there or any science out there which says that the test causes or can be tracked to cause permanent crashes or a permanent reduction in baseline. But the fact that let's all be honest, this is a very mysterious disease that we still don't understand everything about. And so we should explore all possibilities. And, if there's a 1 in a million chance, it's absolutely something we should discuss and consider, so everyone knows what they're getting into before they move forward. What I perceive as the biggest risk factor, and the one that's most obvious, is the severity of the illness. So, taking a step back, this graphic was also taken from the MECFS or the CFS subreddit with permission. I asked for permission first, and they were happy to let me use this. But as you see, it represents the scale and scope of severity of MECFS. So the first and most obvious risk factor, I think, is going to be how severe your MECFS is. If you're mild, where you run an hour and a half a day, but can't do more than 4 hours of work, chances are doing 12 minutes on a bike for 2 days in a row isn't going to cause anything that your body's not already experiencing. On the flip side, if you are bedbound and you can't get out of bed at all, I think there's a pretty significant risk that a 12-minute bike test 2 days in a row could do something to your body that it hasn't experienced before. So I think as you are, as you can classify yourself as more severe, I think the risk increases, and you should, take more steps to potentially talk to your own doctors or consider other things to do if you want to avoid the risk entirely. One thing I also can say is I'd say almost all of our clients are in the mild, moderate, or moderate severe band, because most of the time, if you are severe or very severe and you can prove that you're mostly bedbound, proving that you're bedbound is usually sufficient enough to prove disability. You don't have to prove that you have ME/CFS, but if you need that required care, it's very rare to see a claim denied, which is probably why when I talk to my clients, I've never had a client report back to me that they experienced anything other than a couple weeks of crash. I talk to my clients a lot. This is what they tell me. However, as I was communicating this with people online, I have definitely heard the rumors, which is why I'm investigating it. One very clever person pointed out to me that just because my clients aren't telling me doesn't mean it's not happening, doesn't mean they're not underplaying it. Not because they don't trust me or don't like me, but because people with these kind of illnesses are used to toughing it out and not telling everyone what they're dealing with. And also they're used to having to suffer in order to be validated, in order to get their benefits paid. And I like to consider myself a pretty witty guy, and I had nothing for that. I just had no comeback. I had no response. They're right. It is very possible my clients don't share that with me, or they don't tell me the severity. That said, if I thought the test put my clients at risk, I would never recommend it. But everyone deserves to weigh reality on their own terms. So what I do with my clients and what we do with our clients, and I think if you have a lawyer, your client should be doing it too. The first is informed consent. They should tell you what the 2-day CPET is. They should direct you to the information on it. They should explain it to you, and they should tell you that the science doesn't show that there's a significant risk, but there are concerns that should be addressed. One thing that should always be considered are unique medical circumstances and ancillary conditions. If you have a cardiac issue and MECFS, you may not want to get on the bike at all. That's something you absolutely have to talk to your doctors about. and talk to your, and probably talk to Staci about before you get the test done. Same thing goes for people with back issues. The worst complaint I ever got from someone from the test, and it stands out to me, is that this someone also had a back issue, and the bike exacerbated their back issue for about 2 months. And that's the lesson I learned early as an early lawyer, that this is something I really have to consider. That was pretty rare because most people don't have disabling back issues and ME/CFS. That was a really hard case, a really tough situation. Also, as I just described, considering the severity of the condition and the severity of ME/CFS. If you're already bedbound, probably going on a bike is too risky of a task to undertake. Um, Consideration of the necessity of testing. Now, this is an important one, because there are ways to prove disability in certain circumstances without 2-day CPET. If you happen to have a policy which doesn't have a mental health limitation and you also have severe depression, that may be easier to prove without you having to do the 2-day CPET. On the flip side, if you also have severe cognitive impairment and you're able to get a supportive neuropsychological evaluation, some lawyers will say that that's sufficient in most situations. Other lawyers will want you to get the 2-day CPET and the neurocognitive assessment. But there are a lot of situations where you don't need the test isn't ideal, or there's other things to try first, if you have any concerns about actually moving forward. The other thing is, talk to your own doctors, tell them about the CPET, ask them of their experience about CPET. A lot of people who have ME/CFS or long COVID doctors know about the 2-day CPET. They have their own experiences, and they'll tell you their perspective. And that's usually very helpful to me, because usually the doctors tell our clients it's a test worth taking and it's not too risky. But always talk to your own doctors about these things as well. And if your doctor doesn't approve, a letter from your doctor explaining why you are so disabled that you can't even do the 2-day CPET is a half decent alternative to consider. The other thing to consider, as Staci kind of discussed, is pre and post CPET protocols, basically making sure you're hydrated and rested. I have seen that there's other doctors out there who are coming up with somewhat unique pre and post CPET protocols. I don't know how much weight to give those, but I think it's interesting. Definitely something to consider looking into or asking your doctor about if you're going to do a 2-day CPET. So I also wanted to give everyone just some general advice if you're in these situations where you have a disability claim denied or you're filing a claim. So one, LTD and Social Security lawyers give free consultations. Almost all of us do. I genuinely think I do more to help people with my free consultations than I do by representing them, because half the time I can give people free advice, point them in the right direction, and they're on their way. They can also answer easy questions for you, which are otherwise overwhelming. And usually we're happy to do it, because if you're the 10 to 20% of people who consult with us who end up getting denied, then it's good business for us to talk to you. So, people say, I don't want to waste a lawyer's time. We're happy to have our time wasted in this way. Don't worry about it. Look for someone in your state. There are a lot of LTD and Social Security lawyers who operate nationwide. I find that those firms are rarely as good as the ones who are proud of the work they do in your state. Social Security, especially, if your case is going to hearing, it'll be heard near where you live, and you want a Social Security lawyer familiar with the judge in the hearing. Don't be afraid to use AI to help you out, especially if you need to respond to something or draft a letter. I find the AI hate in the local community these days is somewhat understandable, but also somewhat ableist, in that it can be so helpful for people whose energy is limited and their cognitive ability is limited, to cipher through things or to summarize things or to respond to an insurance company or to ask your doctor questions. It can be a really helpful tool to shave off a lot of energy from things you may need to do in managing your claim. You can never trust it, just like you can never trust anything universally. But if you give it documents and say, please summarize this, or please write a letter in response to this, I've found it to be pretty good, especially when your other option is fighting through it yourself when you're already out of energy. Request your own medical records after every visit, just to make sure mostly your doctor is documenting as much as they can and that they're supportive of your claim overall. Under HIPAA, you have the right to fix errors in your medical records. This means things that are objectively incorrect. If you're 6'5" and they list you as 5'6", if they say you've taken a medication for the past 3 years that you've never taken, things that are objectively wrong, you have the right to fix it. You don't have the right to get them to add anything they miss, to get them to change opinions that they put down, or to get them to restate anything that you don't like the way they've stated it. You can ask them to do this, and I often find that it's the best way to do it is, uh, honey attracts more flies than vinegar. Like you just want to be nice and ask about it. But you always want to know what's in your medical records because the worst way to find out that there's something wrong with your medical records where your doctor said you should be working or something is by the insurance company telling you after they've denied the claim. You want to know ahead of time, get ahead of it, and hopefully have your doctor work through it with you. The other thing I say is don't be a superhero. I say that a little casually, but I see so often people going to their physicians and as I kind of said before, they're so used to like toughing it out that they're not sharing everything with their doctor. You have to share everything with your doctor because if you're not telling your doctor, they're not putting in the medical records. um, I admit it can be uncomfortable sometimes to go into a doctor and just list out everything you're dealing with. It's not a natural thing to do, especially when you're dealing with so much. But it's a really important part of a disability claim. And just keep in mind when you're at your doctor, the insurance company is going to see these medical records. So make sure you're not just talking to the doctor, you're talking to the insurance company and the Social Security Administration who's looking over their shoulder. The other thing I like to tell people is, don't be afraid of mental health treatment. I've gotten a few questions lately. Basically, I've explained the mental health limitations and how it's a fear. And they say, well, I'm having mental health issues, but now I don't want to get mental health treatment because I'm worried that my claim will be denied because of that or limited because of that. Um, it's a reasonable concern, but don't be afraid to get treatment. And here's two reasons for that. One is I genuinely believe everyone should prioritize their health, and mental health treatment it can literally be the difference between life or death. I mean, it can change the way you handle your physical illness. It can change everything, and no one should deprive themselves of that because they're afraid of an insurance company. Two, you shouldn't be that afraid of an insurance company because the best way, in my opinion, to fight a mental health limitation is to have your therapist or psychiatrist say, "Yeah, I've been seeing this person for a long time. They're depressed because they have chronic fatigue syndrome. That's what's disabling them." So don't be afraid of mental health treatment if you are considering it. Um, so that's the conclusion of what we have. We have a few questions in the chat that I wanted to. Oh, there's got a few more came out that I did not see. So there's first question that I wanted to address, or questions asked to both kind of Staci and myself. So someone asked, they're unable to stand for more than about 2 minutes at a time because of spinal stenosis and rheumatoid arthritis and other mobility issues. Um, so would that make them ineligible for the CPET, or are there adaptations that will allow you to take rest breaks during testing?
So you can't take a rest break during the test, unfortunately. It's a
Yeah,
stress test, so it's continuous. Um, you have to be able to give a good effort, which means you have to be able to be on the bike for at least 10 minutes. It's 3 minutes of rest, so you have to sit there for 3 minutes. If you're physically not able to walk, that's one of the, considerations. Can you walk without assistance? You might be too severe, like Andrew mentioned. If you're bedbound, the very severe, those are the patients we don't test. They're just too ill to come in and give a good effort. You have to be able to get on the bike and give a good effort. And for some people, pain is just really a limiting factor.
yeah. Um, the other thing, the reason I wanted us both to answer this is a good example as well because she mentioned having brain fog as well. If you're concerned about the ability to take the 2-day CPET, I would definitely consider a neuropsychological evaluation instead because if that's persuasive, you shouldn't need a 2-day CPET as well. It's a great thing to talk to a Social Security or long-term disability lawyer about. The next question is that her main concern is that the more she does, the more she crashes, and the easier it feels like that she crashes in the future. So she's worried about moving into a deeper state of MECFS by taking the test. How do you decide if it's worth doing if it could lower your baseline permanently? Well, this question was asked at 10:34, so I'm hoping a little bit of it was answered in the next 20 minutes. But the reality is, it's a really personal question. It depends on your situation. It depends on the necessity of the testing. It depends on the severity, depends on whether you have comorbid conditions. It's something I would definitely, if you're in that position, talk to a Social Security or long-term disability lawyer about. There's rarely any harm in filing a claim without these tests. And if you get denied, then you can appeal with the testing. So that's also another thing to consider. Um, so how do you handle a CPET for severe patients who haven't been able to exercise in 10 plus years and currently get keep Pem from even taking steps indoors? Oof. Well, my response would be kind of similar that if you're that severe, first question, are you going to be able to do the bike test?
Mhm.
And if not, I mean, you might be someone who wants to try a different route instead of the 2-day CPET, because if just the act of getting on the bike is going to cause you PEM, then I think you may have a real risk of the test being really hard. So I would talk to an LCD or SSDI lawyer about it, about other things you can potentially do to prove your claim. Um, the next question is, are LTD companies asking for a repeat 2-day CPET after a certain number of years? That's a great question. In my experience, no, they are usually not. Once they've approved a claim based on a 2-day CPET, they will not go and say, hey, we need another one to verify your disability. They'll either leave you alone or figure out a different way to justify the denial. Basically saying there's no longer any evidence of disability, which is them kind of implying that you need a new one. In my opinion, uh, the rule of thumb for other tests is 2 years. So if a test is 2 years old, they can call it outdated. Um, I don't usually see insurance companies making the argument that people have gotten better after the 2-day CPET has, but that's one argument they can make. And one reason why you might need it is they might say, oh, you've gotten better in the past 2 years, there's been improvement, so you need another one. Um, so the answer is it depends, but not usually. Answer live. Okay. So Kimberly asks if she's at the federal review level, is this still valuable for my lawyer? Um, I think it depends on why you're at the federal review level. I'm pretty sure there are instances where the evidence itself is the record is not open, and there are instances where the record is open. Um, and I don't know the details of Social Security appeals well enough to know that. So I would ask your Social Security lawyer and see what they say. Um, so my daughter is 22 and has long COVID. We are working on her disability claim. She had a 1-day CPET and a functional capacity evaluation. Both have shown that she has serious impairment and is unable to work. Do you think there's value in a 2-day test? Um, so it depends. As far as if this is a long-term disability claim, it depends on the nature of the FCE and what disability is being claimed for. Um, I would have to honestly see the FCE because for fatigue-related illnesses, FCEs are a little bit. I'd have to see how they came to that conclusion. Um, and whether they said that she's unable to sit or they actually made a conclusion based about fatigue. Um, so the answer is there's definitely going to be value in a 2-day test. It's going to be better evidence, and it's going to be just more evidence. The question is, do you need it? And is the FCE and 1-day CPET going to get the claim paid? Impossible to know without looking at more information or knowing. But I would strongly consider it. Um, and if she's 22, my guess is it's Social Security. So I would consider talking to a Social Security lawyer about it as well. Okay, let me get the next one. How do you objectively prove you are severe enough to be bedbound? Um, that's a good question. Well, being bedbound is usually pretty good evidence that you are bedbound. If you are bedbound and are needing the care that comes with being bedbound, and you can prove you need that care, whether it's by an in-home nurse or you documenting that you're in your bed or your doctor explaining that you're bedbound, um, that's usually sufficient. The insurance company would then have to come back and argue and justify how that you being bedbound, you're faking it, that that you're being bedbound is a limitation. There also is a world where they could eventually argue that you could work from being bedbound because you work remotely and it could be a remote job. They have not been making that argument yet, but it's possible. So it really how you prove it depends on your specific situation, but there's a lot of ways to do it, usually with support of your doctor, sometimes even video evidence if you need it. Um, has there been any exploration of before and after neuropsych testing with CPET in the middle? No, because neuropsych retesting is not something that can be done usually in a short period of time because of testing fatigue. So from my understanding, you could only get a neuropsych once a year. Because if you do it more than once a year, the second evaluation always shows up as overestimating your ability because you know the easy answers basically. So I don't believe that's been done. Um, but it's an interesting question. Do I believe mild anomic aphasia would be considered proof enough of a cognitive impairment for SSDI? Oh, wow. Not giving me any easy questions today. I do not know. It really depends. I would have to see. You would want a neuropsych evaluation, and to see how that went and what it said, because I don't know. I just couldn't answer that question otherwise. It could be. Um, do you have a webinar on disability around cognitive decline? Not yet, but I'm happy to create one. You're also welcome to email me if you have specific questions about your case or about your disability. Um, let's see, next one. My SSI lawyer never heard of 2-day CPET. Should I get a different lawyer? No, not necessarily. Not everyone has heard of it. I think you may want to educate your lawyer. But I'm sure there are things I don't know that I hope wouldn't be disqualifying for me as an attorney if they've done well for you otherwise. But I would definitely educate them and maybe get second opinions from other lawyers. That's never hurt anyone getting a second opinion. Um, how do we get this test? So you can go to workwellfoundation.org to get the test. Here, I'll type this out to you so it can be in the answers. And you can schedule the exam yourself. Stacy Workwell is located in Northern California. Betsy Keller also has a lab located in Ithaca, New York, which is no longer with Ithaca College, right? They're now their own thing. Okay.
Yes.
And we can, do you know that website? I don't have it offhand.
Uh, paceforwardfoundation.org.
Paceforwardfoundation.org. There we go. Um, if you already have an ME/CFS diagnosis, do you need a 2-day CPET? Usually, yes. Usually, the diagnosis is not sufficient to prove disability, and you need objective evidence as well. But it also depends on what other objective evidence you have. But usually, the diagnosis itself is not enough. Um, with a tilt table, with tilt table testing, you have to be off certain meds for up to 2 weeks prior to the test. Is that the same with CPET?
No, with the exception of stimulants. We don't want to alter the heart rate response. If you're on other medications for autonomic dysfunction or whatever, presumably your doctor has you on them for a reason. We just note that in the report that certain medications can affect heart rate and blood pressure.
Um, this question is for Stacy. Have you done a lot of testing or have these research studies tested people who are moderate or moderate severe?
Yeah, so this is all we have been doing for the last 25 years. So we've done literally thousands of CPETs. Um, what was the question, Andrew? I think yeah.
Whether
Fast forward.
they whether you have experience doing people that are moderate or moderate severe.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, almost all of our patients are moderate to severe. And to sort of put this in context, CPET is used, for severe heart disease patient, cardiologists will do a CPET, pulmonary disease, even transplant patients. And the reason they do a CPET for a transplant patient is to see if they'll survive, right? If they have a high enough oxygen consumption to live. So people doing CPET are literally on death's door in terms of impairment. And while we can't test patients that are bedbound, nor would I want to, shockingly, I'm always amazed and surprised that the majority of our patients are moderate to severe, which means they're in the same category as somebody who needs a heart transplant. And that's just where they're functioning.
Yeah. Okay, just a few more questions before we go and take up too much more of your time. Sorry, typing an answer to a question now. Um, so uh if your Social Security claim was just denied and you have 60 days to appeal, I would call a Social Security lawyer immediately. I would also make sure you appeal on your own before the 60 days is up. Appealing it just means giving notice of appeal. It doesn't mean sending all the documents, making the arguments. You have to notify them within 60 days. You do not want to miss that window. Is Kantor and Kantor available for consults? Yes, absolutely, always. My our website is cantorlaw.net. My email address is akantor@cantorlaw.net. You can welcome to reach out. We always do free consultations. Um, let's see. Where in NorCal? Where are you in Ripon?
Santa Rosa, California is our
Santa
testing location. Yeah.
Santa Rosa. Okay. So you answer this one. You do not have to be off caffeine. Do you have to be off caffeine or stimulants for the 2-day CPET?
Yes.
I was going to answer that one. So you do have to be off caffeine for the 2-day
Yeah,
CPET.
no caffeine, alcohol, or tobacco in the 4 hours prior to the test. You can have your coffee afterwards, though.
Got it. And the last question, do you know of a facility that provides the 2-day CPET in the Boston area? I do not, but Northern New York, Ithaca is going to be your best bet. Um, okay, I lied. One more question. Could the results of these tests go against your case? Can SSDI force you to give the results? Excellent question. So, as far as I know, for long-term disability and Social Security, the answer is no. Well, the answer is definitely no for long-term disability. You'd have to ask a Social Security lawyer to be sure, but because you pay for this out of pocket, you only have to disclose the information that is supportive of your disability. Usually, yeah, so you do not have to submit it if it's not supportive. Um, Okay, well, that's all we can get to when we're already 6 minutes over. I'm really sorry I've taken too much of your time. Thank you all for joining me. We're gonna share the presentation slides afterwards. Let me shoot to my information. This is my information. This is our information. If you want to reach out to me via email, via our website, or via Reddit, I put my Reddit name on there now because I'm on Reddit all the time. It's fun. I'd love to hear from anyone who has any questions. Again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you again, Stacy, for joining
Thank
us.
you. Thank you all for joining us.
Have a good one.